All right. Another
Yeah.
Thursday evening, another Patriots on the Video podcast. I'm Dave Giesel. Got Josh Bennett on the other end here.
Hello.
This week, we are doing the second in our ongoing political series. Ongoing now that we've done a second episode. We've done 2 episodes of the Roman series. Saturday, we are going to do a 3rd episode. Not sure what time yet. We're getting that scheduled. We got a guest on for that. So tonight, for the political series, we wanted to kick off with a discussion of God's justice versus the justice of the world. And this has been something that Josh and I have been talking about a lot, and with some of our friends and stuff. Kind of something we started getting into around the time we stopped doing the radio show. So this is mostly new material. So, and then that'll flow into a discussion of the difference between peace or peacemaking and a position of nonviolence or not doing harm. Because while they appear to be similar, they can be different. They can be very different. So, do you want to kick us off, Josh, with a little discussion about a few biblical references and a discussion about what justice means in the context of God talking to the Israelites or Christ talking to the disciples?
Yeah, sure. Let's start it out with Hosea 6:6. That says specifically, I desire mercy. This is the Lord talking. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and the acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. English Standard Version says, I desire a steadfast love and not sacrifice. And mercy is often translated into a deep love, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. And then we have in Jeremiah, what is that, 22:3, we see that the Lord says, thus says the Lord, do justice and righteousness and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed. Do no wrong to the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. So we've been wondering what this word justice means. And we've come to the conclusion, and that's what we're going to try to work this conclusion around for you folks to understand too, is that God's justice is mercy. And what he desires us to do is to have mercy, which and here is given a specific example of who to give mercy to. I mean, because this is where we had talked about was, well, wait a minute, what do you mean give justice to the widow? Huh? Justice to the fatherless? What are we talking about here? Justice to the resident alien? Are they being wronged somehow? What's going on? But when you read through more and get a little more understand what he's talking about, he's not talking about the political justice that we might think about all too often, where that person did wrong and we came in and we gave him justice. We got justice for the people. He paid his due to society. Rather, it's the justice that he's talking about is mercy, an unending love. So if we look at this, thus says the Lord, give mercy and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the oppressed him who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, or have mercy on the resident alien. Have mercy on the fatherless and the widow. That's what we're looking at here. And there's a big, it's a little bit more eye-awakening, I think, eye-opening when you start looking at these things non-politically, when you look at the word justice and think of it as mercy. Because he says right off what we read in Hosea, I desire mercy. You know, a lot of times we think, or we hear, or people preach, God's a God of justice, and we think of, he's going to take care of those evil people and wipe them all out, and thus saith the Lord, kill your enemy. And And man, we think that we're doing God's justice when we have these political laws and throw this guy in prison. This guy goes a death penalty. And that's not what we're achieving. We're not achieving justice. Obviously, there was times where God, in his justice, had pretty harsh sentences against his people. But he says it's not what he desired to do. His desire was mercy. So our desire should be mercy,
Yeah, and
which falls a
you
lot
know,
more in line with living a peaceful life, having mercy than violent justice that we think that it is.
the other, well, there's two sides to that are interesting too. Like one would be in the instances where the Israelites talk about God judging them, like in the Old Testament.
Mm.
There, many of those passages are their perception, like a bunch of bad things come their way, and they say, "Ah, we're being judged by God for what we've done." And
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of those instances, it's possible that they just, like the idea of sin is it's a decision to separate yourself from what God has for you. And when you make that decision, you also make the decision to you accept the consequences for that by making that decision.
Right.
And so the judgment that they faced uh, could also potentially be, interpreted as the judgment of sin.
Well, Hosea talks about that when he's having children. Hosea's married. One of the prophets is married and has children, and God actually tells him what to name his kids. And one of the daughters, I think, was No Mercy, and one of the sons was They're Not My People Anymore, which probably wouldn't be found in baby name book very often, but it goes along with what you're saying. Basically, he's withholding his protection from them based on their actions instead of actually, all right, you don't want to be my people, fine, you're not my people. Let the world have at you. Reap what you sow. I want to bust in real quick because with
Yeah.
Zachariah, um, the last one I'll read here. Zechariah 7, 9, and 10. Thus says the Lord of hosts, and this is the Lord's talking to Zechariah. Render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, or the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise against one another in your heart. Which is pretty interesting.
Who do you think the sojourner is?
Mexicans. Illegal immigrants. Who else?
Do you think they're violating the borders of the kingdom of God?
Yeah, I doubt it. I don't think there's yeah. And either way, he's talking to the nation of Israel, and all through the Old Testament, he tells them exactly how they will treat people that come in there, that come through. Because he says over and over, you were once sojourners and aliens in Egypt. So you will not treat these people bad. Anyway, what I wanted to say with that was don't devise evil against one another in your heart. And I was thinking about that with rendering true judgments would be kind of the same thing with laws. I read a thing yesterday or today where a guy said, if it was up every man, and I don't necessarily agree, but I thought it was a fun point. Every man's an anarchist at heart. He just wants government and laws for his neighbor. He never thinks of laws applying to him because he's a good person, but his neighbor needs those laws because they might do something wrong. And I think that's exactly what one of the things that we could say that we're talking about here. Don't devise evil against your neighbor. You don't need to make up laws to keep your neighbor in check. You're devising evil. And and we know in the political system in America, at least, that you can't expect to find a true judgment, as he says, render true judgments. You can't find a true judgment with mercy, show kindness and mercy to one another. You can't get that in a court, because a judge today just says, well, the law says you have to yada yada, and the law also gives me the explicit demand that I sentence you to this for doing that. They have these sentencing guidelines. So when you're advocating evil against your brother, one way to do it is advocating for laws against your brother. Someday, or your neighbor, someday he may be in front of the court that cannot render a true judgment and cannot show mercy or kindness to him. And that could be directly from what you supported in the very first place. So it's not
Natalie,
just sit around and hide in our box and go, I'm not hurting anyone. Except for when I go down and, your actions, especially in the political spectrum, which is why it's much better just to not be involved in the political arena. Those actions affect people's lives. And you will not be held, I don't think, or any of us are held blameless for any of those type of things. We will be held accountable.
yes, right.
Well, I didn't vote in Iran. You voted for the guy who did.
I have a picture. So Natalie's been talking about this. She has a much better diagram than this. But this top one. This is about as good as it gets in like a small community. Like imagine like an Amish community or something like that, where you have locally administered law between neighbors. This is about as good as you can get with humans. Evil for evil, good for good. That's about as good as it gets. This is what Christ did. Christ returned good for evil. Christ was given evil. Christ was crucified unjustly, obviously, and forgave while he was being crucified. He returned good for evil. This is God's grace and God's mercy here. And that's what now that we know the example of Christ, this is the law, this is the 10 Commandments, this is Christ, this is the fulfillment of the law. This is the kingdom of man. This is the state. The state takes good and returns evil for good. So, for example, you want to accomplish something positive in your community. So you go, instead of doing it from neighbor to neighbor, you go and you get an ordinance passed, or you try to go get funding from the borough or the county or wherever you live, the city. Well, how do they get that funding so that you can do good? They go and they steal it from your neighbor with the threat of confiscating their property, right? So you set out to do good, and instead evil is done to accomplish that end. That's the kingdom of man. That is the only way the kingdom of man can operate.
Yep.
Which is right there, and it's right there. What's cool about we got Hosea and Isaiah and Zachariah and Jeremiah here. We have all these references. They're all Old Testament references. They're all from before the time of Christ, and so they were all from a time when everyone was still under the law. But it was this foretelling of what was to come. Oh, we have lost Josh. Let me get him back here.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. My internet just went. I'm tired. I'm done.
Yeah, needed a little nap. So anyway, all of these statements about mercy, about justice being mercy and kindness to your neighbor, these are Old Testament Israelites under the Mosaic law verses. These aren't, hippy dippy Christ verses that a lot of people don't like. There's a lot of people who say, well, if it weren't for the Old Testament, I'd have a hard time being a Christian. Well, this is straight out of the Old Testament. And of course, for saying this, several of these prophets were killed. It wasn't well received, but
Yep.
nevertheless, there it is. So I wanted to comment on a quick thing in Hosea 6:6. In Hosea 6:6, it says that God's speaking through Hosea, and he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And I think the not sacrifice part is a big deal because there's many layers to it, right? The first layer is that the Israelites were being nasty to each other. Like internally, they were being nasty, and they were treating sacrifice a little bit like the kind of cliche about Catholics and confession, right?
Yeah.
Well, I can sin all week because I'm going to confess on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so they were using sacrifice as a way of absolving themselves of responsibility. And so one layer for that verse is that the sacrifice is useless if you're not living a life of your own sacrifice of self to others. Then the sacrifice to God is useless. A little bit like there's the parable about the king forgiving the debt to the lender, and the lender owed him like trillions of dollars. There's some stupid amount, right? And then
literally,
yeah, it was crazy. Like if you work it out in gold, it was like $20 billion or something. And then one of his servants or workers or something had like a $2,000, $3,000 loan with him, and he raked him over the coals for it. And then the master who had forgiven him this giant debt found out and was like, yeah, I'm not going to forgive you of that because I forgave you this massive thing and you couldn't forgive somebody this much.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of that there, but then there's also the sacrifice aspect of justice, of man's justice. All justice from the state or the kingdom of man involves sacrifice. Someone has to be sacrificed in order for people to feel that justice was done. There has to be blood of some sort, right?
Right.
So it's all right there.
With the sacrifice versus obedience too. Remember Jesus tells a small parable about the two sons where the father says to one son, go do this for me. And the son says, oh yeah, I'll do it. And he doesn't. He tells the other son, go do this for me. And he says, no way, get lost. I'm busy, whatever. Then later the son that says no thinks about it and says, yeah. So he goes and does it, what his father asked him to do. And the first one that said yes never did. So Jesus asked, which one of these two sons obeyed? And that's back to the, seeking obedience over sacrifice. He wants, don't just read it and say, yeah, that's all cool, whatever. Do it.
Do it. Yeah,
Show
at
the
least,
mercy.
right. The second one, Jesus deemed the second one better because at least he did what he said he was going to do.
Right.
Yep.
Sacrifice over obedience over sacrifice.
Obedience over sacrifice. Yeah, do it, live it. Okay, so that is a good intro that takes us to the second part where I want to go here. So let me think about how to frame this. Okay, here's a good way to frame this. I've been having a number of conversations, and Josh has had a lot of similar ones, and many of us have. Many of us non-statist types have. I have a bunch of them in Canada, and here is the conversation. The conversation is something along the lines of, someone I know here will have a friend or someone, a family member, or someone they just met and they're getting to know them really well. And they get along really well with them, and they're starting to learn a lot from them. And then they learn that this person has done something that's in their mind unforgivable. And they have a struggle with this. And I've had this conversation with many people, and the unforgivable sin that this person has committed is that they support Donald Trump. And
well, it is blasphemy.
What's that?
It does kind of sound like blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, though.
Yeah, right. So, and so that conundrum is an interesting one because the Christ his two laws that fulfill the Mosaic law are love God above all else and love your neighbor as yourself. And that includes love of enemies, right? Love your enemies. And so
Matthew 5.
Yeah. And of course, we also are given enough information to understand that there are no human enemies. There are only these spiritual ones, right? So there are people who are following this a spirit of darkness, and there are people who are following a spirit of light. But we are called upon to even treat those who are persecuting us as people who have yet to receive grace. And Paul is always an amazing example of this, right? So Paul was a zealot. He was a persecutor. So when we hear a news item or something about, well, the Muslims in this country are killing all the Christians there. Well, that was Paul. Okay. Paul was a zealot. So he was a Jew. He was following Mosaic law while he was killing the Christians, but he was doing the same thing. This is Paul. He was doing the same thing. But none of the folks that he went to round up to take to prison or to kill, none of them killed him. They acted in a way that allowed him to live long enough to receive grace from God and become who God had him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we are called upon to do the same. And and Paul was out, whipping people to death and killing people and things like this directly, right? And so
the story of Stephen.
Right.
He stoned him. Stephen said, I see the Lord stand at the right hand of God. So Jesus showed himself to Stephen when he was being stoned to give him encouragement, I suppose. It probably works. And Paul was even more infuriated. Like, kill him. He just said, because Stephen was saying, I see Christ standing next to God. And this was the person that, remember when Christ stops Paul in a vision, he says, why are you persecuting me? Doesn't mention any of his apostles or any of his disciples, any of his followers. He says, why are you? He says, who are you, Lord? I'm the one you're persecuting. And it was Jesus, because when Stephen said, I see him stand, I forget exactly what he says, but he basically says he sees Christ stand at the right hand of the Father. And Paul says, we don't need to hear any more. Saul at the time, before he changed his name, we don't need to hear any more. Kill this man, and I'll throw the first stone. Which, remember, when Jesus asked, who will throw the first stone? Saul was the guy that said, me, I will. I've not sinned. I'm good. Zealot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, who was fortunately granted, who was fortunately shown mercy by those who he was persecuting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for him and for God's will to be done. And so, so that's Paul, right? That's part of Paul's story. I was at an event a couple weeks ago with some folks who are recovering from addictions, and one of the guys there, his name was Paul, and he was telling me some of his story, and he's like, "Crazy that I'm named after a saint, isn't it?" And I was like, "Well, do you know Paul's backstory? Because you're pretty good compared to original Paul's backstory."
Nice.
So that's Paul. And so when we think about, someone committing the unforgivable sin of supporting X or Y politician, whatever color their skin happens to be, whether it happens to be orange or some other color, that it's crazy. I mean, that's crazy. Like, not only do you not know why this person, maybe they have reasons for it. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure they do, but they're not. You're putting somebody in the category of an enemy, and you don't even really know them, and it's an abstract thing. Like, how do they interact with you as a human being? Somehow all that becomes secondary to, whether they think Orange Man good or Orange Man bad. It is, you can, in the conversations I've had, one of the conversations went like this. This friend of mine was telling me about these new family members they had met, and they'd been adopted, so they never knew their biological family, and they met their biological family, and they were in really good communion with them, like getting to know them and stuff, and it was amazing. And we were having this conversation, and I could feel that it was amazing, right? This person was conveying like the spirit of the interactions, feeling this connection between humans and all this thing. And then as soon as they mentioned, but some of them are definitely Trump supporters. It was just like the spirit in our conversation went from one of kind of that the beautiful communion, just to one of like separateness. Like you could feel the spirit leave the room. It was just like gone. And and that's a little bit touchy-feely and spiritual or whatever, but you can totally feel it. You can totally feel it. So anyway, that rant feeds into this other idea that Natalie and I have been talking about, and I've been talking about it a bit with Josh too, which is the distinction between peace and a non-violent way of being. And it has to do with accepting enemies. So if you don't accept enemies, if you say, I really like this person, I really enjoyed getting to know them, but they think Orange Man good and I think Orange Man bad, and so that's unforgivable until they correct their viewpoint to mine, which is correct. I can't forgive them, or I can't be genuine with them, or whatever that barrier is. And so when we talk about peace in the worldly sense or in the political sense, it is often discussed like that. It is it's I won't throw the first stone if you don't throw the first stone. Right? When you adopt the right position, then I will welcome you because you will have adopted the right position. And so it's like making peace. You're trying to make somebody change so that you can live in peace with them, which is like, it's kind of used as a form of agreement. But that's different than nonviolence. Nonviolence is just a statement of, regardless of whether or not I agree with you, I will show you mercy and kindness. This is the God's justice, regardless of whether we agree. regardless of whether you persecute me or feel, that my way of life is should be different. I will do no harm to you. And if you adopt that way of being, you're not in a standoff with anyone anymore.
Yep.
So then it kind of eliminates your enemies. I mean, you still have those who might seek to persecute you, but you don't have people who you're waiting to change their view on so that you can commune with them or talk to them, or get along with them. So there was a verse I wanted to throw in to the mix on this one. And this is a verse I've never really understood. But in light of this, it's making sense in a better way. So this is going to be Matthew 10:34. Matthew 10:34. Here it is. So this is Christ speaking. This is Christ speaking. He says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." So I've never really understood that. And maybe I still don't. It's probably likely that I still don't. But if you're seeking peace, either in your own relationships or even like internationally, this is a big trap that a lot of religious organizations fall into. They go on peacemaking missions, or they advocate for the UN to pass, some resolution about something or whatever. Peace becomes about finding a middle ground for what to agree on, which is different than adopting a stance of nonviolence, of mercy and kindness. And so what Christ is saying here, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And so that's the sword there is interpreted a number of different ways. Some people interpret it as the truth, right? Christ is the logos. In the beginning was the word. Christ is the spoken truth. And that's the sword of, that's the sword of truth, right? And it cuts. So it cuts in that it separates what is false from what is true. It doesn't unify them, it separates them. And so that's a metaphorical interpretation of what Christ is, that, I have it. R.T. France has a analysis of that verse where he says, he was an Anglican cleric, he says, the sword Jesus brings here is not military conflict, but a sharp social division, which even severs the closest family ties. So this
So Trump is like Jesus?
What's that?
So Trump is like Jesus?
Yeah, especially for the true believers on either side.
Yeah.
But it's not, so following the truth is not about casting out your family or anything like that. It's not, Christ is not saying here that you should forsake your family. What he's saying is you should adopt a way of being that is entirely in line, to the extent that you're capable of living it. It's entirely in line with the way of being that I bring to you. I bring the true way to be in the world to you. And to the extent that you're capable, things will go as well as they can for you if you follow it as closely as you can. But if you do that You will not get along with everyone.
Yeah.
People will not be comfortable with it. They will not like it. Now
They're going to
that doesn't
cast you out.
they will cast you out. They will cast you out. That's right. And so this is where the distinction between peace and nonviolence is. If peace is this getting along, that means you're not going to be able to adhere to a merciful, kind way of living, because the justice of the kingdom of man says no. It says no mercy, no justice. We need blood. And when you refuse to participate in the system to whatever extent you're capable of, when you say, I refuse to seek blood to make this right, because it won't. I'm not going to return evil for good. Not going to do that. I'm going to return good for evil. When you adopt that way of being, in whatever way, it could be as simple as just like, deciding not to vote or whatever it means in your life. People will not like it. They will not be comfortable with it. And so it will separate. It will separate your way of being and their way of being. But that doesn't mean that you stop being kind and merciful, right? That doesn't mean that you stop living in charity with the community around you. It just means don't expect everyone to agree with you. If you adopt this way of being, people will try to pull you in. People will try to pull you into the sacrificial system around you. And we see this, we saw this all the time on the show. We'd even get, it's most succinctly summed up with this phrase: it doesn't matter who you vote for as long as you vote.
Yep. Just participate. So you're not outside. You're not one of those people. Yeah. And I think that if you're so comfortable in the world that the world doesn't hate you to a certain extent, you're doing something wrong. You're not doing something right. Because Christ said that the world will hate you as it hated me. So if you're getting along hunky-dory with everyone, you should get along hunky-dory with everyone, right? We're not saying be an enmity with man, but man's going to have enmity with you. And if it doesn't, you might want to examine your life and say, why is it that I get along, or these people feel so comfortable with me around and still do evil things, even when I'm there? Now, I'm just using a simple example or whatever. They should feel like, ugh, I don't want to do this with this guy around here. Or, certain conversations shouldn't come up because you're there. Little enmity things. They're like, oh, this guy, there goes all the fun. The enmity is not between you and your fellow man. It should be that man is going to have enmity towards you, because we're called to even love our enemies, not just so. How much less our brothers, our fathers, sisters, moms, all that kind of, our neighbor. Mind if I read real quick out of Matthew 5, the love your enemies section?
Yeah.
Matthew 5:43. You've heard it that it was once said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, this is Christ, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And here's the caveat with all this. He's not saying it just to sound like a sandal wearing Jesus that eats granola crunch. There's a reason why he's telling us to do this. So that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. Say what? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so I will be a son of the Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good. He sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't even tax collectors do the same? And if you only greet your brother, what more are you doing than the others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And what is that perfection? He is saying perfection. You want to perfect your life and be called a son of God. Love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. Now, I used to do this and still get this in my mind every once in a while. Or at least I'd say this out loud. I'd be like, yeah, I'll pray for that jerk. Lord, avenge me. You know, kind of, I'll pray a little David's prayer on that guy. Oh, yeah. So, I just want to bring that up because this isn't about feeling good, because it doesn't feel good to, before that, retaliation. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say, don't resist the one who is evil. If anyone slaps you on the cheek, turn him the other. Anyone would sue you to take your tunic, let him have your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. It's not something that's easy and supposed to make you feel good. It's so you can be called a son of God and reach the perfection we never can actually reach, but you're on the road.
You're on the road. And at the end of Matthew 10:30, the 10:34 and friends section that I read in 10:39. So that section ends with, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So what does that mean? And if you, to the extent that you seek meaning in the world through man's justice and and all of those things in the material world, you will have the experience. You may have the experience. I'll say I had the experience of running faster and faster on a treadmill. And you know where treadmills go? They go nowhere. Yeah, where?
Round in a circle.
Round in a circle. And so whoever finds his life will lose it. You'll pour all your years into things that turn to dust. Which we all know. Like, we all know that. Even if you're not spiritual, well, you are a spiritual being. I mean, by the definition of the word spiritual. But if that word doesn't sit well with you, if you think you're made of stuff, well, yeah, you're going to turn back into unanimated stuff. You already know that. So you're guaranteed. You already know that you lose your life. There's nothing to find. And so if you imagine that there were something to find that was beyond you, if you can imagine that, that's what Christ is talking about here. And he's saying that the way to that is to live in a different way, is to live for the eternal, right? It's to live for what will always be true. And that means adopting a set of values that are very, very, very low time preference. And that's not going to be compatible with the way of the world. And people will be uncomfortable as to why you're doing that. And they'll try to pull you in. So the particular context for this that I think is somewhat interesting is there's the increasing violence in America from extreme left-wing groups, right? And there are some interesting calls from extreme left-wing groups to arm themselves and become competent in the use of their weapons, so that they can, wage the revolution. And what's interesting, there are many things that are interesting to me about that. One of the things that's interesting to me about that is there are a lot of people on the right who are like, yep, it's on, or it's going to be on soon. And like, well, what does that mean? What do you really mean by that? And I also find it somewhat funny because there have been groups on the right that have been saying the same thing for a long time.
Long time.
Yeah. And so it's another one of those cases where both groups are seeking peace through the elimination of their enemy. Right? And so peace is not a sufficiently good goal here. But the strongest, well, to me, I'll just speak for myself. What appears to be the strongest position to take is one of nonviolence and mercy, because both groups claim that they're in the right. Especially the extreme. Let's just talk about the extreme left right now. The extreme left that's advocating, violence, basically, claims that they're in the right. They claim that they're on the side of justice, right? No one uses the word justice more than the extreme left right now.
Yeah.
And what do they say justice is? Well, justice is equality. It's the elimination of oppressive hierarchical structures. It's the elimination of oppressive laws and their enforcement and all these things. So what would be the strongest way that you could demonstrate to the community around you that the justice that the extreme left seeks is an illusion? It's not the truth. The true justice is to be merciful, as we talked about at the beginning of the show. So here, imagine this scenario. Imagine that you became the best embodiment of Christ that you're capable of. No one's going to be even close to perfect, but you follow Matthew 10:34 and Matthew 5:43, love of enemies and dying to the world. So you become the most competent, the most skilled, the most kind, the most generous, the most loving person that you can possibly be to everyone in the community around you. And then you are targeted by some group on the extreme left or wherever. You're targeted by some group, and they seek to take you down. And they either seek to take you down legally, or they do it, or they actually, do something physically and they harm you, and you forgive them. What is the impact in your community from that? When people in your community see that happen, what are they going to see as truth? I mean, it's a radically powerful weapon to adopt this way of being.
Yeah, not easy.
Not easy. But you don't even have, whenever there's a fight where there's the initiator and then there's the defensive side, there's always the argument about who started it.
Mm-hmm.
But with non-resistance or non-violence, there's no argument about who started it.
Yep. You're ending it.
You're ending it, which is what Christ did.
Over and over and over. And even if you don't have a seen impact on what your way of being is, say in the particular example that you were just talking about, Dave, even if you don't have a seen, like, well, I do what I was supposed to, but I don't see any good effects from it or whatever, doesn't mean, for one, you do it anyways. We're not doing things to get effects from the world, to get praise from the world. We're doing it to be, as we just read, we're doing it to be sons of God. We want to be sons of God, period. But you don't know what kind of seeds or impact you're having on people that you'll never talk to and you'll never know. You don't know. Everything you're doing is going to be looked at. And let's just say it was a public case, like, some of these people that you see on the news, or Antifa posted a poster and blah blah blah, and they went and beat on his door and whatever. And instead of, yep, and I got all my guys ready with my M16s, we're going to hire. You don't necessarily have to expect to get all this great outcry of, oh, what a person of God he is. You're not going to get that, actually, because the world doesn't give a crap about God. And again, we're not looking for their justification anyways. But you don't know what impact you're going to have on the life of the person that you treated that way, the right way, or the people around them, or the people that know the situation. It's let's say like when you and I first met. I was finally kind of out of my anti-war ways. But like, let's say Christianity for one. If I was a warmongering Christian, you pretty much would have had no use for me, especially my Christianity, right? You'd be like, oh yeah, you're one of them. Uh-huh. But I wasn't. I hate war. I hated war. When I met you, I was at the point. I hated war. So, and I didn't know if it meant anything to you or anyone else I talked to. But to me, it did. It was doing what was right. But then, we stayed friends because of that, I think.
Yep. Well, that's largely why we even got to be friends in the first place, is like we both adopted a position that put us outside of any mainstream group.
Yep. Yeah. And just that one thing of trying to live, at least, I guess I'm just saying, you don't know what effect you're going to have on the relationships that you're building, relationships that you have or want to have, or just people that you interact with. You may never know, but if you're doing what you're called to be, if you're being who you're called to be, if you're being a son of God, you are making an effect. You are having an effect on the person's life. It might be just the tiniest of seed that won't sprout for 10 years. But in 10 years, the seed might go, oh, I remember this. Yeah. So I was just bringing that up, I guess, because don't get discouraged if you don't see something good come out of it right away. It doesn't matter if you do or not. We're not looking for the world to pat us on the back, because if anything, the world will stab us in the back. And if it's going to stab us in the back, you're doing it right. Then you're doing it right. Because they killed Jesus for it.
It's going to stab you in the back anyway. You can't take sides with it.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Either way, so you might as well do what's right.
You might as well do what's right. It's literally a deal with the devil.
Yeah, absolutely literal. Ah, that's good. Yeah, it's kind of like when you're a little kid, your mom blames you for something, you're going to get whooped even if you didn't do it, and you're kind of like, man, I wish I would have done it anyway. No, I wish I would have done it because I'm going to get whooped. So just do the right thing anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So that is actually we are at 55 minutes or thereabouts.
What?
Hour flies by.
Man, didn't seem like we even cracked the book.
No.
Or the phone, as it may be.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'd like to get on. We'll have to do some more on these with some focus on what we read about in Hosea and Zachariah. Specifically, maybe we can talk about mercy towards. What are we talking about with the justice for the fatherless and the homeless, basically, and because people have a real world. In the real world, there are fatherless kids. We have a friend. I won't say who it is because I didn't ask him to publicize it, but we have a friend who is giving mercy to a fatherless child right now, and going to be that father. We all know there's homeless people wandering around, so it's a real world thing. What do we do with those people? There really are hungry people out there. What do we do with them? Well, that's why I pay my taxes, so we can. I'd like in the future too. We'll get into some of that. Give some real world applications for it. The widows. You know, there's a lot of, you've met, we've both met. We know there's a lot of old widows out there. What does it mean to give them justice? What does it mean to give them mercy? You know, something we all know there's facilities packed full of old people that no one goes to see, and they're just waiting to die. And you know, we can take the attitude of, well, at least they got a nice place to die in. But is that really what we're called to do? I don't think so. So
You can, the striking thing about all those categories of people is they're the easiest categories of people to make an excuse not to visit or care about.
yeah.
Right? Like a childless widow has no heirs. Like after they die, what's the impact in the world? They're just gone.
Yeah.
And same with the homeless, right? Well, no one's gonna miss them. And yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. Another interesting thing to think about is that the fatherless, the poor, and the homeless are usually the same person.
Yeah. Yep. You know, there is a specific reason why I realized. See, during the Iraq War, I kind of turned into gung ho for Jesus with guns. I had my best friend was in the military, and all I could think about was just go over there and kick their butt and get out of there. Kick their butt and get out of there. Don't kill my friend. Don't kill my friend. And what specifically, the specific thing in the Bible that told me I was wrong were these verses that we just read about giving justice to the fatherless. And I don't remember what news story I was reading or what person I was talking to or whatever, but they're talking about kids getting blown up. You know, well, yeah, collateral damage. Specifically, it was, I don't remember if it was reading it or talking to someone, but I remember kids being killed and talking about, well, you know, it's sad that collateral damage. And I thought, that's not justice. Killing kids and we're making widows. We're not giving justice to the fatherless. We're creating fatherless kids. War's evil. And that was it. And it was those verses what changed my life towards war forever. And plus, I had kids, and I'd look at them and go, yep. What if I came home and they're all dead? Not cool. Or what if I got blown up for no reason, and I got all these fatherless kids? Who's going to take care of them? Who's taking care of the ones in Iraq? Who's taking care of the ones in Afghanistan? Who's taking care of the ones in Syria, Libya? Go on and on and on. No one is. So that's what changed my mind on it. Changed my heart. Convicted me. No more.
Yeah, that's a good series of shows there. You got a show on homelessness and the opioid crisis, and a show on war, both in there. I spent some time in Iraq. I went to Iraq 3 times in 2013, something like that. I think I spent a total of like 4 or 5 weeks in Baghdad. And I got to know some guys there really well. And they were in the Iraqi army. And many of them had been in the Iraqi army from before the time that Saddam Hussein was even the prime minister or president or whatever he was of Iraq. They were there before him. They were there when he was there, and they were still there. And I was like, well, how does that work? And they're like, he's just a politician. You know, your generals don't come and go when you elect a new president. I was like, true. And they're like, he's a politician, and I'm a state employee. You know, I do this job. And I was like, well, what do you think about, you know, this guy or the last guy or the guy there before? And they're like, they're all idiots. They all have us do stupid stuff. But this one guy, he was a major there. He was telling me that. He's like, they're all idiots, you know, but whatever. Or no, he was a general. And he said, so then I said, well, why are you in the Iraqi military then, or the army? And he said, well, when I was growing up here, this was the second most desirable city in the entire Middle East to live in. It was Lebanon was number one, and then Baghdad was totally number two. And he's a little biased, but whatever. And so he put on his "Make Baghdad Great Again" hat, and he started telling me about his granddaughter, and I think she was 3 or 4. And he talked about how much it pained him that she would not know the amazing civilization and city with this history that goes back to the beginning of recorded history that he had grown up in, that it had been essentially erased from the map. And that the reason he was still part of the Iraqi army or the civil authorities or whatever was because, in his opinion, from his perspective, that was where he would have the most ability to make Baghdad great again, to restore it to the place that he imagined his grandkids growing up in when he started a family. And it was interesting because this is a guy who the United States government right now is working with, as an ally in the region. And he was also a guy who they went to war with in 1991 and 2003. It's the same guy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. It was very interesting.
All
People
right, well,
trying to live their lives.
Yeah, exactly. Funny. Most people just want to do that. I guess, yeah. I guess we'll call this a good one. But at least we know we got some goods to come.
Yeah, a couple more in the series. So yeah, Saturday.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm thinking 9. I can do if it works for you, 9 this time. That'll be about 6 o'clock Gerard's time. And is 1 good for you?
Yep, it's perfect. So we'll have another.
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll have another stream. Yeah, we'll have another stream on Saturday. Yeah, sounds like 9 Alaska time, 1 Eastern, 1 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be up on the channel. And this will be our third part in the Romans series, and our first one on Romans 12 and 13.
Yeah, we'll have Professor Gerard Casey on from the University of Ireland.
And Tom Woods Liberty University.
Oh yeah, boom. The big classroom. Yeah, this guy's really good. You'll enjoy him. Oh boy, you're gonna have someone smart to listen to finally.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that, and we'll see you guys in a couple days.
See ya.
Bye.